going to look today at one of the post-resurrection stories, one of the things that Jesus was caught up in after he had risen from the dead. And it's interesting to see what Jesus did and said in those days after resurrection. And you'll know this story, but I'm going to read selected verses from the story because I don't think I'm going to take an entirely traditional interpretation this morning. We're going to look at a slightly different way, perhaps, of looking at it. So I'm just going to pick out the verses that are relevant to that, because there's a whole load of stuff going on in this story, and we could get very diverted on some of the other things as well. So I'm going to read from John chapter 21, and it's the beach barbecue, if you know what I mean by the beach barbecue. So bear with me. John's probably got it all on screen, the relevant verses, so I'm just going to skip over the ones that I'm missing out. So John chapter 21. Afterwards, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, or Galilee, as other gospel writers called it. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas called Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them, and they said, we'll go with you. So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. And then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it's the Lord, because he'd seen him on the shore. As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, it is the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off. Don't you just love the detail? He had taken it off, so he put it on and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. Another detail. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. And then they had breakfast with Jesus. And when they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me? He answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my sheep. I wonder if you know what it is to let somebody down, or to feel as if you've let somebody down, and then to meet them again, and to have to look them in the eye, and wonder whether you are welcome or not. How are you natural with them? What do you say? How do you start the conversation? And often this story is interpreted as the interaction where Jesus deals with Peter's betrayal. But I wonder, if it is that, I've always thought that it was a bit unkind, actually, of Jesus to do it quite so publicly, quite shaming. And Jesus doesn't actually say to Peter, I forgive you. Wouldn't you thought he would actually say that? Surely Jesus would have used that word. So I wonder if this encounter has a different meaning. I'm going to read a verse from Luke. I should have found it earlier. Luke 24, verse 34. Verse 34. well, 33 and 34. They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11, and those with them assembled together and saying, "It's true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon." A private meeting. I wonder what went on in that encounter. It's not recorded. It took place before the beach event that we're looking at today. But I think, I can't prove it, but I suspect that that's where Jesus dealt with the issues of betrayal. The first time he met him, wouldn't he have sought Peter out on his own and dealt with it, told him he was forgiven? Why do I think that? Well, I think that because of Peter's behaviour. If Peter did not know if he was forgiven, would he have leapt out the boat and rushed onto the beach? You'd kind of think he would hold back. Am I welcome here? How's Jesus going to react to me? Is he going to ignore me? How's he going to be? But he doesn't do that. Peter is eager to meet with him. And it suggests that relationship has been restored. Maybe I'm being fanciful, but that's how it reads to me. If we go back to the beginning of the story, Peter's gone fishing. And he's been joined by his friends. Why did they do that, do you think? Well, again, I wonder. When worlds fall apart, when your personal world falls apart, what do? You go back to what's familiar, don't you? You go back to what's comfortable. You go back to what you can do almost without thinking about it. You go back to the familiar. And maybe he's even assuming that that's what life's going to be from now on. Those 3 years as a disciple were great, but that was then and this is now, and things are so different. What does the future look like for Peter? Maybe it's time to move on. So he forgets it all, gets out his boat, and goes fishing. And now Jesus is on the beach. And we've seen how Peter was keen to meet him. And we have 3 questions from Jesus. We have 3 responses from Peter. And we have 3 statements. And if this conversation isn't about putting the betrayal right and bringing Peter that forgiveness, then what's this conversation about? Because that's quite often how it's interpreted, isn't it? At least that's what I've heard and read over the years. It's clear there's a threefold repetition. And I don't think there's coincidence that it relates to the threefold repetition of the betrayal. So there is a link. And as I was pondering it over the last couple of days, I wondered, is it possible that Peter had been forgiven by Jesus, but that he had not forgiven himself? And sometimes that's harder, isn't it? Circumstances make things different, but maybe his shame at his betrayal is so deep he can't let it go. No wonder that the repetition of these questions 3 times grieves him. It says that it grieves him. Because it puts a finger on that sore spot. He can't let it go. And when we've done something wrong, and we all do, and it's important we accept responsibility, it's important that we accept the consequences, maybe, the blame. but it is also important. There may be other forgiveness issues that we have to forgive others, and maybe they have to forgive us. But there is the issue that we have to forgive ourselves. I don't know about you, but that's something that I find very hard. And I woke early in the night worrying about whether I had written an email last evening in a way that wasn't the most helpful. And it goes over and over and over in my mind. You're nodding, you know that experience. And I can't let it go. It's so hard to let it go. And then we learn to self-soothe, don't you? I wonder what you do when you self-soothe. Peter went fishing. I eat chocolate. Maybe you've got something else that you do. Peter's going fishing was probably the healthier alternative. However, chocolate's nicer, yeah. But he hasn't let it go. And you know, when we don't let things go, when they are within us like that, and we go over and over and over, it is very possible that they can become a new identity. And it could become a hindrance to how we live for the future. Peter could have been dragged around in the future, dogged by this betrayal. He needed to be liberated and to be set free of it. Because in his own mind, Jesus called him Peter the Rock. I wonder what his own name for himself was. Peter the betrayer. And if he lived within that identity as Peter the betrayer for the rest of his life, what was that going to mean for him? He needed to be set free. And Jesus asks him these three questions. And I'm not going to look at the questions. I'm not going to look at the, do you love me more than these? You will have heard it before in sermons and talks, I'm sure. The different words that are used for love and the way that Peter responds and the different words that Peter uses. It's all important stuff, but it's not quite what I'm thinking about this morning. I'm more interested in what Jesus says in terms of his responses. The first time he says, feed my lambs. The sense, the meaning behind those words is spiritually nourished by the word of God. My lambs, my vulnerable flock, the young. Feed and pasture my lambs. And then he says, take care of my sheep. Different meaning here. Shepherd them, care for them, pastor them. Distinct from nourishing. Guard them and guide them. My sheep. Little sheep, the meaning of that word. Little sheep. And then he says, feed my sheep. Shepherd the flock of God. That's what he's saying to Peter. Shepherd the flock of God and feed them with the word of God. Why is Jesus using the language of a shepherd when he's talking to a fisherman? He is the shepherd. Jesus is the chief shepherd, isn't he? Yeah. You see, as I was thinking about it, I was thinking, this is a new calling for Peter. It's new hope. It's a new future. And Peter won't be able to fulfill it if he's forever thinking of himself as Peter the betrayer. It's a new identity, a new task. One of leadership, one of responsibility. Can't be dogged by self-doubt. Peter ends up with a choice, doesn't he? Jesus has forgiven him. Does he accept that forgiveness? He needs to forgive himself. He has the choice whether to do that. And then he has the choice of whether to take up this calling, this new hope. We've been singing about hope this morning. When our worlds fall apart and it looks like there is no hope, here's Jesus standing before him at breakfast with new hope, a new future. And I wonder whether for each one of us there is something that we need to let go of, something that we need to face, something we need to forgive in our own lives, forgive ourselves. And whether we can sense what the Lord might be saying in terms of hope or calling or identity or whatever it is for you, because it will be different for each one of us. But he is the God of hope, even when our worlds have fallen apart.